Tonight on the Worldview Weekend Hour, the color revolution that the deep state and the Marxist Democrats are attempting in the fall of 2020 to steal the election from President Donald Trump. And if they can't take the election, perhaps their real goal is chaos, and then use the chaos to further bring down America, try to make President Trump another second-term illegitimate president, as they've been calling him in his first term, and then use the chaos to renegotiate America's political future. Perhaps even negotiate the acceptance of his second term for the elimination of the Electoral College. Tonight, we'll look at a 23-page report that the Democrats have put out themselves on what they are attempting to do. Many have declared this a color revolution, just as the CIA has been involved in other nations. Now, are they attempting to do this in America? The Worldview Weekend Hour begins right now.
WVW-TV presents the Worldview Weekend Hour with Brannon Howse. Whether the topic is law, science, government, economics, history, family, social issues, education, or theology, Brannon brings the issues of today into clear focus through the lens of a biblical worldview. And now, here is your host, Brannon Howse.
Good evening and welcome to the Worldview Weekend Hour. I'm Brannon Howse. Tonight we're going to talk about understanding the color revolution, or attempting to understand the color revolution taking place in America. Well, what is a color revolution? Who would be attempting this color revolution? We'll get to that tonight. In fact, I want you to know that what we're going to be reading from tonight is a 23-page report that the Marxist Democrats have put out themselves. No conspiracy theory here, folks. This is a 23-page report that they have put out themselves. Now, you might ask, why would they do that? Well, it's not uncommon, folks. I don't care what books of mine you read. My first book in 1993, Cradle to College, An Educational Abduction. My book in 95, Reclaiming a Nation at Risk. Marxianity, Religious Trojan Horse, The Coming Religious Right, Grave Influence. All of these books are filled with detailed documentation of the globalists, the Marxists, the internationalists, the statists, the socialists, whatever you want to call them, the revolutionaries, spilling their guts on what they want. These people are notorious for doing that. And they even tell you why they're putting out this report. We'll get to that tonight. Now, we're going to have to move really fast. I spent about 3 or 4 days on radio this past week covering this topic. I'm endeavoring tonight to cover all this in 1 hour. Why? Because I believe more people will watch it if we just put it all into 1 hour and then disseminate it all over the country once we put it up as HD later this week. So my friends, I'm going to move really fast. In fact, you may need to watch it again once we put it up online and give it to the different networks that carry us later in the week, because we're going to move really fast. So let's get right to it. Understanding and responding to a color revolution in America. A color revolution seeks to prohibit or delegitimize the election of a political leader. Now, this has been done, I believe, and I think you can go research this for yourself, by the CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency, in other countries. And maybe sometimes it was warranted because they were trying to get rid of a bad dude who was about to be elected or was elected. But I believe what we're seeing now are the Marxist Democrats in conjunction with the deep state. And we know that the Marxist Democrats work with the deep state. I mean, look at Adam Schiff and all these guys that work in conjunction with the deep state and the dirty, filthy cops of the FBI at the top floor, according to Donald Trump. That's what he called them from the Oval Office. Look how they all worked in concert together, right, to try to overthrow President Trump, stop him from being elected, and then get rid of him, or at least certainly embarrass him and try to prove in some manner that he's not a legitimate president. Where they've really set him up with a narrative for the last 4 years, have they not? So clearly the deep state is in concert with the Marxist. Now again, they've tried this, the CIA, in other nations and have done this. We've put a lot of people into power or removed people from power as a nation through the Central Intelligence Agency. But many believe that this is what the deep state is now seeking to do within America. So again, it is a color revolution, as the slide says, seeks to prohibit or delegitimize the election of a political leader. Now, a color revolution relies heavily upon a few things. One, political warfare. What is another word for political warfare? It's brainwashing. It's propaganda, folks. Brainwashing or propaganda. And of course, we've done an entire 20 programs, 21-hour shows, 21-hour shows on brainwashing, right? And I'm working on a brand new documentary now, Brainwashed America. So political warfare is another word for brainwashing or propaganda, and this is flat out political warfare, which means they have to spend a lot of time lying to people. That's what brainwashing is about, lies, political manipulation, emotional manipulation, psychological operations, disinformation. Number two, a color revolution relies heavily upon labeling the elected official as authoritarian, dictator, bully, fascist, or lawless. Has any of that occurred in America in the last 4 years? The first 4 years of President Trump's term? Has he been referred to in all of these terms? A would-be dictator, authoritarian, a bully, a fascist, lawless, liar, crooked, right? They've been laying a narrative for a very long time, have they not? And that's one of the things that color revolution relies upon, is labeling elected official and an elected official the target of the color revolution in these ways, part of that propaganda. 3, a color revolution relies heavily upon 3, strikes. Strikes to disrupt basic services and societal order. Do you think their program tonight, in their document tonight, we might see something about strikes? Because reality is, if you go research a color revolution, it is known that strikes are a big part of a color revolution, which is shocking to me in some regards, but in others, they actually admit that strikes might be necessary. So again, a color revolution often involves strikes in order to disrupt basic services and societal order. 4, clashes with law enforcement and riots that are blamed on supporters of the political leader being opposed. A color revolution relies heavily upon clashes with law enforcement and riots that are blamed on supporters or the political leader being opposed, okay? These are the things that a color revolution relies heavily upon. Now look at this. This slide here is from MSN, because how do I know this PDF that I'm reading from, which by the way is entitled The Transition Integrity Project? Now, this was a series of exercises that were run in June of 2020, and the report came out August 3rd, 2020. How do we know this is legitimate? Well, I had to go and verify this was true. So I found the report on this website right here from MSN. Notice I marked the website URL, msn.com. And they put out the report, and they provided a link to the PDF, which is where I got the report. Now, it's all over the internet, but this is where I found it. And I wanted to verify that even the liberal mainstream press was promoting this URL, promoting this PDF, promoting this report as being legitimate. And so let's look at it. Let's go to the first slide. Preventing a disrupted presidential election and transition. Look at what it says. In June of 2020, the Transition Integrity Project convened a bipartisan group of over 100 current and former senior government and campaign leaders and other experts in a series of 2020 election crisis scenario planning exercises. The results of all 4 tabletop exercises were alarming. Now, I'm just going to highlight the report. We don't have time to read all 23 pages, so I'm going to pull out the bullet points and show you what's in it. I don't know if anyone else has done what I'm doing tonight. If they have, I haven't seen it. I haven't seen any other talk show host that I know of go through this like we're going to do. But I think when we do, we'll understand what's coming. And isn't that part of our goal, is to understand what's coming? Because if you're going to take on brainwashing or propaganda or political warfare, the kryptonite to brainwashing is truth. Truth. So once you know the truth and once you know their tactics, it's easier to share this with your family and friends, particularly the young people in your family who might be subject to the emotional manipulation and brainwashing, right? And sadly, there's many in this listening audience tonight that have young people that are being brainwashed, and you need to have the information at your hands to help to limit the brainwashing and propaganda, and the way to do that is through truth and understanding and exposing the tactics of the enemy. So let's go to the first slide, or our next slide. Among the findings we highlight in this report, the concept of election night is no longer accurate and indeed is dangerous. So don't expect the results on election night. That's dangerous. It's not accurate and it's dangerous. So they're already preparing the public for this to drag out for weeks. Now you might ask why? Because it's very possible that the initial results will be that Donald Trump has won enough electoral votes to be the president of the United States. But they don't want you to accept that, because after all, they got all these ballots, all these mail-in ballots, right? Now, there's a difference between an absentee ballot that you request and a ballot that's just been mailed randomly to voters. And I'm talking to friends of mine who got their ballot in the mail. They didn't even request one. They're planning on going and voting at the polling booth. So are they going to vote twice now? Will someone else pick up that ballot? Not to mention, how many dead people has this been mailed to that other people will pick up, or pets that people will pick up and then use, thus voting twice. See, this is the difference between an absentee ballot that you request and a mail-in ballot that's just sent to everybody. Now, isn't it interesting? The Chinese coronavirus shut down many churches and schools where voting takes place. So that set a nice scenario for this. And isn't it interesting that that took place in early 2020? Not the first year of President Trump's term, not the second year, not the third year, but the beginning of his last year, January of 2020, we start unfolding, and in America, February, March, the coronavirus from China. That now even a Chinese virologist is coming out saying she can prove that this is man-made. Well, that's what many have been saying for a long time from a biolab in Wuhan, Communist China. And so we know we have a Communist Chinese coronavirus that was spread deliberately, apparently. I don't think we can argue about that, can we? And look what it's provided the basis for. We also know that many of these street rioters and Black Lives Matter and Antifa people are being funded by communist groups, including Maoist Chinese front groups. So interesting, a Chinese coronavirus and now Chinese-funded street fighters. Notice the timing again? An awful interesting convergence of events. Seems as though this was planned a little too easily, not to mention all the people back in 2010 with the Rockefeller and their lockstep program giving a scenario in 2010 dated for 2012. So the report in 2010 stated a fictional scenario of 2012 where a virus is out, it's in America, businesses are shut down, stores are shut down, face masks are on, temperatures are being taken. That seems a little odd, does it not? And then you've got, of course, Bill Gates, Dr. Fauci, Birx, all tied together. We've proven that in past shows. It just all seems a little too convenient, does it not? And so one would have to wonder, is the Chinese Communist Party involved in some of this disruption? We've certainly heard a lot about Russia and their interference, supposedly. How about the Chinese? But what we're being told now is don't count on the results on election night. It's not accurate. It's dangerous because now we got to count all these mail-in ballots after the election. And many of them will be fraudulent. And their thought is that they can then put Biden over the top. So they're already telling the public don't plan on election night results. Campaigns, parties, the press, and the public must be educated to adjust expectations starting immediately. So they're already telling us the report is for the purpose of educating people, to educate the public, the parties, the press. So again, this is why you're starting to see this narrative pop up in articles and on news shows. We had someone call into our radio show when I went through it this last week and said, hey, we're already hearing these talking points in the press. Yes, you are, I'm sure, because that is why this 23-page report was written. All right, look at this. We assess that there is a chance that the president will attempt to convince legislators and or governors to take actions, including illegal actions, to defy the popular vote. Wait a minute, what does that mean, defy the popular vote? Do we elect a president based on popular vote? No, we go by the Electoral College, right? Didn't Hillary Clinton reportedly win the popular vote, but Donald Trump won the Electoral College? Because our framers, the framers of the Constitution, were wise enough to understand the need for a constitutional republic and then a Electoral College. And therefore, by getting the candidates to campaign across the country, not just concentrate on highly populated states, and in this day and age, concentrate on New York, California, and a few other liberal states, and you would ignore the flyover countries. So we don't elect someone over popular vote, but notice what it says. We assess that there is a chance that the president will attempt to convince legislators and or governors to take actions, including illegal actions, to defy the popular vote. Wait a minute. If they hand in their Electoral College votes, even though it might be against the popular vote, that's not illegal. So they're actually setting up that what would be very normal, constitutional, and legal is somehow illegal and against the popular vote. But our whole basis is not on the popular vote. Look at this. Of particular concern is how the military would respond in the context of uncertain election results. Then they go on to say, the purpose of this report, the purpose of this report is not to frighten, but to spur all stakeholders to action. So they're admitting the purpose is to get people to act. Isn't that the job of a community organizer, according to Saul Alinsky, to get people to move, to act, to agitate to the point of conflict? So they're admitting the purpose of this report is to get stakeholders, which is the American people, parties, special interest groups, agitators, the press, all to get involved and to act on. It goes on to say, our legal rules and political norms don't work unless people are prepared to defend them and to speak out when others violate them. So they're telling you right now why they're writing the report, and that's to mobilize their team for action. They go on to say it's incumbent upon elected officials, civil society leaders, and the press to challenge authoritarian actions in the courts, in the media, and in the streets through peaceful protest. Yeah, put quotes around peaceful protest. But notice again, they're saying authoritarian actions. There's that word. They use it over and over. Got to be ready to deal with the authoritarian, the dictator type guy. And we need the media involved, and we need the people on the streets. So this is a big public relations, PR, disinformation, propaganda piece to mobilize their people. It goes on to say, two biggest threats. What are the two biggest threats? Lies about voter fraud and escalating violence. Voting fraud is virtually non-existent. Oh, is it really? Voting fraud is nearly non-existent or virtually non-existent. Well, that's interesting because we saw a judge just throw out in Iowa thousands of ballots, didn't we? Thousands. We've seen in other states where there's all kinds of things going on, irregularities, dead people voting, pets voting, people voting twice. What do you mean voter fraud is virtually non-existent? No, voting fraud is becoming very normal. But again, they're going to flat out lie about, well, many things. Let's go to the next, back to the slide. But Trump lies about it to create a narrative designed to politically mobilize his base. So Trump is authoritarian, Trump is a liar. That's what they're already saying. The potential for violent conflict is high, particularly since Trump encourages his supporters to take up arms. Really? Now, when has Trump encouraged his supporters to take up arms? They go on later to say, well, Trump appeals to his voters and the Second Amendment. Well, defending the Second Amendment, encouraging the Second Amendment, encouraging a well-regulated militia, if you will, as the Constitution talks about, American citizens that are armed, that's not encouraging people to take up arms. Encouraging people to practice their Second Amendment rights is not also encouraging them to take up arms and be involved in some kind of unconstitutional, illegal revolution. But notice what they're already setting up here. Who's going to be the one taking up arms? Antifa? Black Lives Matter? The revolutionaries? The Maoist front groups in America? No, it's going to be Trump's people because Trump's encouraged them to take up arms, don't you know? I mean, we've barely gotten into this report. You see where this is going? All right, it goes on to say, the administration of President Trump has steadily undermined core norms of democracy and the rule of law and embraced numerous corrupt and authoritarian practices. Really? How so? How so? Of course, this is really rich coming from the Democrats who thwart the Constitution at every turn and are in a relationship with the deep state, the dirty, filthy cops on the 7th floor of the FBI. They're involved in FISA warrant violations, one after the other. So this is kind of rich coming from them, isn't it? But again, that's exactly what a modern day coup would look like. It would involve a lot of psychological projection. What is psychological projection? Psychological projection is putting onto your enemy what you're actually doing. He's authoritarian. He's crooked. He's a liar. He's a bully. He doesn't care about the rule of law. These are all the things that the Marxists do. They lie, they cheat, they bully. I mean, have you seen the people being beat up simply for wearing a MAGA hat? Have you seen the things happening to little old ladies walking down the street getting punched in the face? I mean, who are the bullies? Who are the authoritarians? Who are the liars? Who doesn't care about the rule of law? It's them. But psychological projection puts all of that onto your enemy. And that's exactly what they're going to do and are doing. The American people have the right to choose their next president without intimidation or interference in the normal electoral process. Believers in democracy and the rule of law should therefore be prepared to take action to ensure that the results of the 2020 presidential election reflect the will of the American people. Well, wait a minute now. They're going to talk a lot about the will of the American people and the popular vote. Why? Because they're setting up the narrative that the Electoral College is not the will of the American people. The Electoral College does not represent the majority. And if we're for democracy and the rule of law, we should be for whoever wins the popular vote. And what they're doing is they're going to set up, I believe, a conflict to undermine and discredit as unfair, unconstitutional, not democratic, our constitutional system of the Electoral College. Because they know if they can do away with the Electoral College, they can win every election from now on. The Marxist Democrats can win every election by just concentrating on their liberal states where they have a lot of population. So think about this. They don't have to take the election from Donald Trump. They just have to use the appearance of trying to take the election from him to create a lot of chaos, and then they can use the chaos to negotiate the acceptance of Donald Trump's second term. Okay, well, we'll agree to accept you as president for the second term if we can get the legislators and governors to agree to some election reforms. And before you know it, they're pushing for the end of the Electoral College and popular vote, and you can kiss the future politically for any conservative candidate goodbye when it comes to the White House. Let's go on to see what else they say. President Trump has begun to lay the groundwork. It will look like this. Like many authoritarian leaders, so how many times are you going to call him that? Like many authoritarian leaders, and by the way, what do they mean by authoritarian? Why is that important? Because as I document in my book, Marxianity, at marxianity.com, as I document in my movie Siege at siegethemovie.com, Theodore Adorno wrote a book in 1950 on the authoritarian personality, as I've told you before. And they put together an F-scale test. The F-scale test was to determine whether someone was a fascist. Now, the book was called Authoritarian. The book that came out in 1950 was called The Authoritarian Personality. And to determine whether you were an authoritarian personality, they did a survey. They did a test. It was called the F scale, and the F stood for a fascist. So another word for authoritarian is fascist. If you believe in God, if you believe in right and wrong, if you believe there are certain things that are so deep in your value system that they're not open for discussion, that makes you authoritarian. In other words, if someone says, you know what, I believe so much in the issue of pro-life, it's not open for discussion. I'm not going to discuss this. There's no dialogue. There's no common ground to be found here. I am 100% pro-life. Or I'm 100% committed to the Second Amendment and will not budge. Whatever it might be. If you have no desire to have a dialogue with someone, you're so rigid, as they say, that's the sign of someone who is authoritarian, i.e. a fascist. So their use of the term authoritarian is really a dog whistle of he's a fascist. This is what Theodore Adorno of the Frankfurt School, the Marxist Frankfurt School, wrote about in his book that I deal with in my documentary Siege at siegethemovie.com. So notice again, they keep referring to Trump in this manner. Like many authoritarian leaders, President Trump has begun to lay the groundwork for potentially ignoring or disrupting the voting process by claiming, for instance, that any mail-in ballots will be fraudulent and that his opponents will seek to have non-citizens vote through fraud. Well, has that gone on before? Non-citizens voting? Yep. And if you have a judge in Iowa throwing out thousands of ballots due to fraud, and they're being examined in other states now, would it not be legitimate for the Department of Justice or secretaries of state who are in charge of the elections in various states to seize said mail-in ballots to verify whether they're legitimate? Well, of course, if you have fraud going on, you need to seize those ballots and examine them, right? So just like they had the hanging chads back in the day of Gore versus George W. Bush, now it's going to be about mail-in ballots, right? But the idea that you would seize those or question those means that you are authoritarian. And he's already in the process, they say, of laying down the narrative of the vote being stolen by mail-in votes. So they're getting out in front of this and saying, expect Trump to discount the mail-in votes. This only shows he's authoritarian. This only shows he doesn't care about the rule of law. When reality is, Secretary of States are the one that count the votes, and many Secretary of States in Republican states will likely want to grab a hold of those and bring them into a secure area and analyze them. And they have the right to do that. to make sure we're having free and fair elections. But if you do that now, which is a normal process, by the way, if you really care about the rule of law, that's going to be deemed an attempt by President Trump controlling people at the state level for his theft of the election. They go on to say, former Vice President Biden may expand the margin of consternation by highlighting voter suppression by the GOP. Well, what's voter suppression? What does that mean? Purges of voter rolls, shutting down of polling places, failure to fund election administration, ID and other verification requirements, intimidation of voters, etc. So again, anything, let's say you had some kind of irregularity going on with a polling place, or you had a concern about people and who was actually voting. Any attempt they make to make it free and fair, they're already stating this is going to be a part of the GOP plan to steal the election. Biden may also be able to expand the margin of consternation by questioning the overall legitimacy of a system that doesn't require the winner to get a majority of the popular vote. So what are they doing already? They're already saying, look, this is not a legitimate system. He can question the legitimacy of the system that doesn't require the winner to get a majority of the popular vote. So what they're already doing is showing that they don't have any respect for the Electoral College. Now, why would they do this? Apparently, they expect Donald Trump to win the electoral votes. And they have for a long time wanted to do away with the Electoral College. So I believe you've got a couple things going on here. Maybe they really are going to try and steal the election from Donald Trump. Maybe what they are going to do instead is just create a lot of chaos, a big narrative about how unfair and unjust the Electoral College is because it doesn't give the victory to the one who wins the majority vote. And they'll go ahead and honor the Electoral College this time, but say in the future it needs to be gone, thereby creating all of this chaos, all of this looting and burning and rioting and Antifa and Black Lives Matter, black shirts in the streets. They can use all of that chaos to get the elected officials at the state level, the governors, the legislators, to all agree to come together and basically change our voting process. And I would bet, my theory, and it is a theory, that what you'll see is the attempt to get rid of the Electoral College. Why else would you have this narrative going over and over and over? So maybe at the end of the day, I believe it's possible the globalists really want Donald Trump. But they're going to use Donald Trump and his personality and the conflict to get the American people to go where they otherwise would never go. I remember, and I've quoted it so many times, James McGregor Burns, a globalist. He wrote a book in 1984 called The Power to Lead. Let me just paraphrase what he said. He said, we could never get the American people to go where we want to go. Because you see, the framers have been so smart, so shrewd. Little tinkering and frail bridges will not get the job done. We've got to turn the system upside down. But the American people will not go where we want to go under normal circumstances. Only will they go where we want to go as globalists will be under a stupendous national and political failure or crisis. You can't let a good crisis go to waste. Saul Alinsky, agitate to the point of crisis. So maybe at the end of the day, they want Donald Trump in office for a second term. Now, why would they maybe want Donald Trump for a second term? So perhaps they can use him and his people to give justification for more conflict to tear down America. You see, I've been saying for many, many years that I believe the globalists have allowed the Marxists off the leash. The Marxists and the Islamists off the leash to be their junkyard dogs to destroy America. And once the Marxists and Islamists have created all this chaos and worn people down, as the former former KGB officer Yuri Bezmenov said in an interview in 1984 with my friend G. Edward Griffin, former KGB officer Yuri Bezmenov, and I show the clips in my documentary Siege at siegethemovie.com, he said the Russians know how to bring down America. Demoralize, destabilize, chaos, and then the new norm. You create all this chaos, and then you implement the new norm. So the Marxists and Islamists are allowed to burn things down, like they're doing. Create disruption and chaos to collapse America from within, the Marxists and the Islamists. And then the globalists step forward. Some of your Republican and some of your Democrat globalists and people on a global scale step forward, and they begin to offer up solutions. And guess what? Those solutions actually look pretty good compared to where the Marxists and Islamists wanted to take us. But they had to use the Hegelian dialectic. Opposites conflicting, thesis and antithesis, the opposite. A view and the opposite view, conflicting, crisis, agitating, over and over. Let the damage be done. Create a crisis and then exploit the crisis with a solution. So the one who created the crisis now offers up the solution that nobody would have accepted, virtually nobody would have accepted without the crisis. Now what the globalists offer up on a global scale is going to look pretty good compared to what the Marxists and Islamists are doing. And many people are going to say, I just want to get back to normalcy. I just want a life that's normal. Demoralized, destabilized, chaos, and the new norm. So I would not be shocked, my friends, that the globalists are allowing the Marxists to do this. Because I think at the end of the day, the globalists, as I've said for many, many years in many of my books and documentaries, the globalists really want a mixture of socialism with capitalism, called communitarianism. A mixture of socialism with capitalism, communitarianism, also known as communism light. Whereas your Marxist want outright revolution and socialism, the economic philosophy of communism. Your globalists tend to want a little mixture of both, so they can keep the middle class afloat and keep taxing them, right? Communitarianism, communism light. That's what your Fabians want. Fabian socialists want the same thing, whether you call them communitarians or Fabian socialists. And so the communitarians, the globalists, the Fabians, they stand back, they let the Marxists and the Islamists off the leash, do their destruction, and then they walk in with solutions. I'll tell you something else that's going on, I think. I think they're creating so much chaos, and will continue to do that, that many people will start to leave the states, like they already are. California, New York, Washington State, Oregon. They'll start leaving the blue states, and those people will go to the red states. Now, what will happen is many of them will bring their politics with them. And they will take a state like Colorado, where you have a lot of folks from California moving into Colorado, and now you have them wearing t-shirts and having signs that say, "Don't California my Colorado." The folks from Colorado left that miserable state, California, because of its policies, and they show up in Colorado and vote in the same kind of people. And now they're destroying Colorado. Now, wouldn't that be a great plan for the elitist? To cause all this chaos that takes all these people that are consolidated in California and Oregon and Washington State and New York and get them so irritated that they get up and they start moving into red states and bring their politics with them. I don't want all this chaos. They didn't bargain for this, so they flee, but they take their politics with them. And pretty soon, you now see California or Florida was just like 32,000 votes shy of electing pretty much a neo-Marxist. Just a few years ago as governor. About 32,000 votes shy of electing a neo-Marxist governor in Florida. Hey, it wouldn't take too many people moving there to turn that state. Or how about Georgia? They were about 50,000 votes shy of electing Stacey Abrams, another neo-Marxist. Well, how could you get people to leave the liberal states where you have more people there than you really need? I mean, you're going to be able to hang on to those states. You got surplus of liberals there. Let's spread them all over the country. So maybe you agitate and get some of these people to spread out. So I think they got a multiple purpose plan going on here, folks. A big plan going on. Let's go back to our slide. So again, Biden may also be able to expand the margin of consternation by questioning the overall legitimacy of a system that doesn't require the winner to get a majority of the popular vote. So again, attacking the Electoral College. During the exercises, Team Trump and GOP elected officials took the following steps: attempting to halt the counting of mail-in ballots by filing cases in state court, or leaning on Republican leaders to stop vote counting or to certify a result early. Turning out their well-organized and committed base to take to the streets in Trump's favor, in part by disseminating disinformation about the danger posed by pro-Biden demonstrators, by suggesting likely Antifa violence, etc. Well, that's interesting, because didn't I just go the other day to Antifa.com, and where did I end up? A Joe Biden website. I did that the other day. And again, I think you can make a strong connection between the Chinese and communists backing Biden and Kamala Harris and many of the people in Black Lives Matter and Antifa. But notice again what they're saying. It's going to be the disinformation coming from Trump's people. Again, psychological projection. The disinformation, the political warfare, the brainwashing, it's going to come from Trump's people. And they're going to say that pro-Biden demonstrations, well, they're going to suggest that the violence came from Antifa and types tied to Joe Biden. They go on to say, relying on both Fox News and right-wing social media to echo and amplify pro-Trump messages and to facilitate the harassment and bullying of election officials. To do what? To cause chaos. To cause chaos and to delay and to intimidate officials into taking actions that benefit Team Trump. Well, who's the one creating the chaos? Who's the one that's going to be harassing and is already harassing people? I mean, look at people can't even go to dinner. They're being told to raise your fist in the air, get down on the ground. Again, psychological projection, putting onto their enemy what it is they actually do. The exercises suggest that Trump and his supporters are likely to engage in an orchestrated disinformation campaign. There it is again. Orchestrated disinformation campaign to shape the public's perception. Well, wait a minute. Who's doing that? They are. They've already said the purpose of their report is to put out information and educate people to get them to be ready to move and to act. They're the ones putting out the disinformation. They're the ones putting out the lies. But again, they're going to say it's Team Trump that is doing this. They go on to say, in the TIP's exercises, once a narrative took hold, casting the election results into doubt, Team Trump was able to successfully convince GOP-controlled state legislators to submit separate slates of electors declaring Trump the winner. Well, wait a minute. You would expect Republican-controlled states that he wins to submit their slate of electoral votes. You would expect that. But watch what happens. A normal process of Trump winning a very conservative state like Tennessee or Alabama, or maybe a swing state like Michigan or Wisconsin, and he wins this, and therefore he gets those electoral votes. And they go ahead and they verify it, and they submit that ballot. But that's going to be called, well, they were bullied to do that because we haven't waited for all the mail-in ballots and counted those. But wait a minute, what if a bunch of those are already fraudulent? They won't tell you that. So you could be acting in the most reasonable, lawful manner and move forward to submit your slate of electoral votes that a candidate won. And by doing that, you'll be slated as being unlawful, against democracy, bullying people, intimidating people. And certainly in the states, folks, where there's a Republican governor or legislature or Secretary of State. So no matter what these people do, even if it's down to the letter of the law, there is going to be the disinformation campaign to say that what they did was unlawful, when in fact it's not. And the average person out there in America today who's bent toward this kind of propaganda is going to buy it hook, line, and sinker, and they're going to then be enraged. And they've already been told by Nancy Pelosi that Donald Trump and the GOP are enemies of the people. They already have elected officials openly declaring on video and podcast and interviews the need to be on the street rioting and burning and looting. We've already had the governor of Minnesota, the mayor of Minneapolis, talking about, we've heard you, we understand your concerns, we understand why you're doing what you're doing, and now we are ready to listen and bring the change. In other words, they're rewarding the behavior. Folks, everything up to now, the Marxists, some of them have openly said, has been a dress rehearsal. This has all been up to now a dress rehearsal, setting the narrative, setting the stage, agitating. Let me ask you something. Did you see all the bricks being dropped around the country? How is it that pallets of bricks showed up being dropped on city streets as we have pictures and video of this happening all over the country? How did this happen? Look, this is overwhelmingly well orchestrated. And yes, some of the people that go out on the streets are just very stupid people that have bought the disinformation, the propaganda, the brainwashing, and frankly, they're looking for an opportunity to burn and loot and riot. Because after all, they've been told for decades now in their educational system that America is an evil, racist place, and you are not getting ahead because you've been pushed down because America is an evil place due to the Judeo-Christian worldview and the free market system, i.e. the pejorative capitalism. So they have all been programmed, brainwashed for decades All they have to do is gaslight these people. And they're looking to go have a great time of burning and looting and rioting. Others are professional rioters. They are trained. We know for a fact, because of all the shows we've done, some of them have gone to Syria. Some of them have gone to Venezuela for training and come back to America. But many Marxists have admitted this has all been a dress rehearsal for the revolution to come. So whatever happens, even if the elected officials in a state follow the letter of the law, it will be painted in such a way that they did something against the will of the people. And this is what a tyrant, a dictator, an authoritarian does. And this will be, again, agitating the simpletons within our society to go out and be involved in violence. Which, of course, again, could require governors or the president to use the Insurrection Act to call out and federalize the National Guard to restore order. Now, again, they create a crisis. A president does what other presidents have done, but what presidents have done in the past, President Trump can't do without them holding him to a different standard, right? But if you have a situation where he is, after the election, forced to call out or federalize the troops, use the National Guard in this way to restore order, to use the Insurrection Act to bring order, they will again use that. So what they're doing is they're agitating, creating a crisis, creating the chaos, the burning, the looting, the rioting, and then when an elected official, governor or the president, responds in a way that is necessary to restore order, which is the purpose of government, reward the righteous and punish the wicked, and make a stable and just society, they will be told what they're doing is wrong. And that will be used to convince the people that you're dealing with a would-be dictator. So every time you turn around, they're going to be trying to set up leaders that are actually doing the right thing. They go on to say, during the exercises, Team Biden and Democrat officials took the following steps. Team Biden and Democratic elected officials took the following steps. Organizing 1,000 influencers to denounce efforts to steal the election. Organizing all living presidents to stand with Biden and denounce Trump administration efforts to subvert the democratic process. Well, what if again he's not? What if he's just saying we need to make sure these mail-in ballots are legit? Hey, we're just going with the Electoral College, not the popular vote. That's the Constitution. It will be deemed as being against the democratic process. And again, it'll be very interesting to see what past presidents do. But notice this next one. Organizing a bipartisan national day for restoration of democracy and a national day of unity, both including faith leaders. Now, can you imagine the hirelings and wolves and useful idiots they're going to roll out? And I venture to guess you'll see some from mainstream evangelicalism. Maybe David Platt, maybe Matt Chandler, maybe Mark Dever, maybe some of the neo-Marxist over at the Gospel Coalition that I write about in my book, Marxianity, at marxianity.com. People already over there at the Gospel Coalition pushing white privilege, pushing reparations. I mean, they're the ones that a few years ago, as I detail in my documentary, Sabotage at sabotageofthemovie.com, were telling people to tell your pastor to tell their congregation to vote for Hillary. So these so-called mainstream evangelicals, I bet you're going to see many of them as the faith leaders that are joining this rally for unity. As though, again, who's causing the disunity? Donald Trump. But who's really causing the disunity? Well, we know. We're watching their plan, their disinformation campaign. They're lying. They're painting conservatives, constitutionalists, Second Amendment people, Donald Trump supporters, Donald Trump himself as dictators, authoritarian, bullies, fascists, racist. But watch the faith leaders they roll out, which is exactly why I've written so many books on what's coming to the modern evangelical scene. So many people have wondered, why does he write Religious Trojan Horse, The Coming Religious Right, Marxianity? Because religion is going to play a major role and has been and will continue, because the globalists and the communists openly stated they could not accomplish what they wanted to do without hijacking religion. As one Fabian said, socialism will not work in an irreligious country. They want to use religion mixed with their socialism. Well, Jesus was a good socialist, don't you know? Jesus was for social justice, don't you know? And they'll use religion. And that'll create a false dominant church that I've written about that will help set up the coming global system. So they're going to roll out their useful idiots within the faith community, and watch how many of them are within mainstream evangelicalism. Attempting a capital strike and a work stoppage as part of an overall effort to push corporate leaders to insist that all ballots to be counted. Well, that'll be interesting. What corporations might they call on? To do what? Shut down Walmart? Shut down your Target? Shut down, your favorite coffee, Starbucks? Or I don't know what they're going to do. What corporations are they going to call in for a work stoppage? Now, I mentioned to you at the beginning of the program that one of the things the color revolution often relies on is strikes to disrupt society, right? What if you have teachers, which we know the teachers' unions are liberal. We know many of the people that have been arrested as part of Black Lives Matter protests and Antifa groups, that when they're arrested, they end up turning out to be teachers, many of them, professors. So we know the NEA, the National Education Association, and many of these groups have been for Marxism, socialism, globalism. So would you be shocked that maybe some of these unions would get together and strike and shut down all the schools in America, those that have opened, in order to irritate voters? Maybe your garbage would stop in some places. What other unions, and again, many of the communists have taken over the unions, what unions could they use to bring strikes to disrupt society, societal order, and create so much chaos that even certain people who maybe at one point supported Donald Trump say, enough is enough, I'm done. I just want to get back to normal. Let's get to the table and negotiate some kind of future. Well, so much crisis and pain and trauma has been created for so many weeks that maybe now even Republicans will finally say, okay, fine, maybe we ought to get rid of the Electoral College. It does make sense that the majority vote should be who gets the presidency. You wear people down. You wear people down. Remember James McGregor Burns, we cannot get the American people to go where we want them to go, except under an extreme political and societal and social crisis. The new norm. So we told you, a color revolution often involves strikes. And strikes are about one thing, folks, irritating the average person. So they finally scream, throw their arms up in the air, wave the white flag and say, how can we make this end? Team Trump was consistently more ruthless than Team Biden, more willing to ignore existing democratic norms to make the use of disinformation. But they just got this mantra going nonstop. To deploy federal agencies to promote Trump's personal and electoral interest. So if the Justice Department and Bill Barr get involved in any way in doing what is a natural process of making a secure election or dealing with rioters or insurrection, anything he does, he's going to be accused of using the agencies under his control or bullying the governors of Republican states, Republican governors or Republican secretaries of state or Republican legislators. He's going to be accused of bullying them to do his political bidding, no matter what he does, even though if what he's doing is exactly what should be done to restore order. And to engage in intimidation campaigns. Team Biden generally felt constrained by a commitment to norms and a desire to tamp down violence and reduce instability. Really? This election represents an existential crisis, the last chance to stop a rabid and potentially irreversible U.S. decline into authoritarianism and unbridled nativism. So again, tribalism, authoritarianism. This is your last chance before we fall over into a dictator, the would-be dictator Donald Trump, who's actually talked and laughed and joked about staying longer than 8 years, that he deserves more time in office. That's what they talk about. Donald Trump's openly stated he deserves more time in office. Well, he said that because of how they wasted his time and his energy and his attention with the phony Russia gate. But they're using that to say, you see, he's already talked about staying in office longer than 8 years. So this is your last chance before we fall into a dictatorship. Now they're scaring people, letting them know they need to get into the streets. They've already said they want people in the streets. In the scenario that most closely mirrored the 2000 election results, the Democratic candidate wins the popular vote but loses the Electoral College. Team Biden pushed, listen now, Team Biden pushed to overturn certified results in states with Democratic governors, and negotiated hard for permanent structural reforms in exchange for a recognition of a Trump victory. Wait a minute. Team Biden pushed to overturn certified results. Well, what are we talking about here then? We would be talking about certified results that then move to the electoral vote by those electors in those states, the Electoral College. I don't know about you, but what I see here as I read is they're going to use all of this crisis, and then after the big crisis, what's it say? They're going to negotiate hard for permanent structural reforms in exchange for negotiation of a Trump victory. You know, I want to repeat. The Marxists, at the orders of the globalists, may want Donald Trump a second term. They want to use him as a whipping post by which to continue to create chaos to collapse America from within. And they need someone like Donald Trump to do that. So at the end of the day, they may really want him. I mean, if you didn't want Donald Trump as your president, the Democratic Party, why on earth would you put up candidates like Joe Biden and Kamala Harris? I mean, the guy doesn't even know who his wife is at some points. I mean, he's saying the craziest stuff. Why on earth would you put up this candidate? Are you telling me a nation of more than 300 million people, these are the two characters you can find? Does anyone really think they thought they could win with Joe Biden? And not to mention Kamala Harris, she didn't even do that well when she was running on her own in the Democratic race. My theory is they want Donald Trump to win. They want him to win. And they're willing to use all the crisis and the agitating and the disinformation to create so much chaos that they can eventually negotiate the recognition of a Trump victory. Then what the globalists can do is push toward their goal of January 2021 with Prince Charles and the head of the Economic World Forum and all these other leaders that in January of 2021 are talking about the Great Reset. The Great Reset. China is talking about dumping America's debt. China and Russia have already declared an economic war on America. I deal with that extensively with Kevin Freeman in this book, in this documentary right here, SiegeTheMovie.com. I deal with the economic war that is already being waged on America by Russia and China. And maybe with the political chaos and the Chinese communist coronavirus, which has had us expand our budget, our federal books, I should say, by $6 trillion in 2020 alone, which is debasing our currency. It's a hidden tax on Americans. It's stealing their purchasing power. And by the way, isn't that what John Maynard Keynes said? Keynesian economist John Maynard Keynes, who helped give us the International Monetary Fund by a continuous process of inflation. We can steal the majority of the people's wealth and not one man in a million will know what we're doing. Well, the communist Chinese coronavirus seems to have been spread on purpose, shut down our churches, shut down our schools, shut down voting places, justified mail-in ballots, also has us spending like crazy to keep the economy propped up, $6 trillion in 2020 alone, creating inflation, destroying the American dollar as the world reserve currency. And by the way, they just happened to have a conference planned in January of 2021 called the Great Global Reset with all these globalists, that many of them who are pushing for, at the World Economic Forum, a digital currency. We've done shows on that. A digital currency. Well, it's going to be a lot easier to reset the American dollar, take 40% out of your bank account, and reset the American dollar if it's a digital currency. But isn't this all falling into place very nicely with many of these nations on a global scale? And they've used Donald Trump and the agitating to draw out the enemies of America and unify people against an enemy, Donald Trump and his supporters. So I wonder if they really want Donald Trump so they can finish destroying everything on his watch and say, this is what you get. This is what you get when you elect a man like Donald Trump. This is what you get when you go outside the norms of even the Republican Party. I mean, after all, look at all the Republicans that even want this guy. Look at all the never-Trumpers that were Republicans. Let this be a lesson to you, America. You stick with the traditional candidates of both parties. So this is going to be very interesting, is it not? Look at this. The period from November 4th to December 14th sets the stage for a potential fight in Congress on January 6th, 2021. This is when Congress reconvenes. Teams were often able to convince state legislators or governors to submit a slate of electorals contrary to the popular vote. Well, why is that a problem? That's what the Electoral College is supposed to do. It's not based on the popular vote. It's based on the Electoral College. So already, teams were often able to convince state legislators or governors to submit a slate of electorals contrary to the popular vote, as though that's a problem. No, that's honoring the Electoral College, our constitutional system. So you see how they're setting this up. Many participants expressed concern that the Department of Justice has been politicized and would be used to provide legal cover for the president's actions. In one TIP simulation, the teams placing the Department of Justice, or the teams playing the Department of Justice, and the Postmaster General took action to seize ballots going through the mail, allegedly to safeguard the ballots pursuant to a fraud investigation. Well, isn't that what you would do? Again, notice how even what a reasonable person will do or should do is going to be deemed somehow unlawful and used as propaganda to agitate that you're about to roll over into a dictatorship. Look at all the illegal things he's doing when they're actually common sense legal things you would do. TIP scenarios exercise suggest that President Trump and his more fervent supporters have every incentive to try to turn peaceful pro-Biden or anti-Trump protests violent in order to generate evidence that a Democratic victory is tantamount to mob rule. In most recent past, President Trump on numerous occasions called on Second Amendment people to defend their rights. Well, what's wrong with that? Trump can rely on surrogates to embed operatives inside protests to encourage violent actions, and he can mobilize a range of law enforcement actors, including the National Guard troops, whether federalized or under the control of GOP governors, who might, without proper training or if led by politicized actors, escalate matters. So again, no matter what he does, it's going to be spun as he's a dictator. And notice again, Trump's people might get into some of these Democratic rallies and street protests, posing as Democrats, posing as pro-Biden people, and do something violent. So if someone does something violent, they're going to say, well, how do we know that wasn't really a provocateur of Donald Trump's? It's just posing as a pro-Biden person. Boy, they've really covered their bases. There will likely not be an election night this year. Unprecedented numbers of voters are expected to use mail-in ballots, which will almost certainly delay the certified results for days or weeks. Despite overwhelming evidence that voting fraud is extremely rare, falsely claiming fraud is a common tactic to undermine voter confidence in election results, and Trump is using it already. Another significant concern is that if both Trump and Biden supporters take to the streets, it will increase the risk of violent conflict, particularly since President Trump has repeatedly encouraged his supporters to take up arms. Well, my friends, you see exactly what they're doing. They've laid it all out in their own report. Well, again, this is a disinformation document. This is a political warfare document. This is a deep state, cultural, Marxist, democratic document, as they've said, to educate their people and the press and their supporters and their street people for what they need to do. So the solution is to know your enemy, know your enemy's tactics, and refute their lies, largely like we've done tonight. And also to prepare, to be ready for what's coming and possible disruption and strikes, so that you can be ready and be prepared. Look, we're not into doom and gloom. We're just into reporting the facts. We've reported them tonight. This is their own document. This is how you carry out a color revolution in America. And like I said, the truth is kryptonite to a political warfare, brainwashing, propaganda, disinformation, psychological operation campaign. And that's what we've sought to do tonight. Now, if you appreciate what we do and all the work that goes into it, we invite you to support us with a tax-deductible contribution. You can do that right now at wvwfoundation.com, wvwfoundation.com. If you prefer to send a check, you'll find our mailing address there on our website. You can also use our phone number if you prefer to give over the phone, a tax-deductible contribution over the phone. However you give, by mail, online, or by phone, we are a listener-supported network. We have over $3,000 a month that we spend in streaming and storage to give away programming. We have a lot of other expenses just to maintain what we're doing. I won't get into all that tonight, but broadcasting is very expensive. So will you support us with a tax-deductible contribution at wvwfoundation.com? Please do that. We sure appreciate your support. As again, we are a listener-supported broadcast network. So tonight, we've sought to reveal their plan, to expose their propaganda. And now it's up to us to educate as many people as we can about their disinformation, propaganda, brainwashing, psychological disinformation campaign. Thank you so much for sharing this with your family and friends and for watching. Till next time, I'm Brandon House. Take care.